Good afternoon. Today we are going to do the first chapter of botany for class 11th, which will be cell, the unit of life. Now let's start off this chapter by defining what a cell is. Now a cell is the structural and the functional unit of life. So let me write that down. I'll write it in blue. Cell is the structural and functional unit of life. Now organisms are of two types. They are unicellular and multicellular. Now, unicellular organisms are capable of, write this in green, unicellular organisms are capable of two things. The first one would be independent existence. So, independent existence. And now the second thing they are capable of is performing essential functions of life because they have to perform them to be stay alive. So we are talking about single cellular organisms here, which are organisms with only one cell. And one cell is the entire organism. So that single cell has independent existence and it performs the essential functions of life. So performing the essential functions of life. Functions of life. Alright. Now anything less than a complete structure of a cell does not ensure independent living. Thus, the cell is the fundamental structure. Now, let's talk about some scientists here who did give us major contributions to botany. Now, the first scientist we are going to talk about, I'm sure all of us would have heard his name. He is Robert Hooke. Now, as we all know, Robert Hooke studied and discovered the cell from a thin slice of cork. Now, cork, C-O-R-K, is the outer layer of the bark, and these are usually dead cells. So, what Robert Hooke observed was basically only the cell wall or a dead cell. So, let me write that down here. Robert Hooke discovered a dead cell in a thin slice of cork. Thin slice of cork. Now, what is cork? Let me write that down here as well. Cork is the outer layer of the bark of the tree, that is. Fine. So we are done with Robert Hooke. Let me write Robert again. That didn't look as good. Robert Hooke. Fine. Now the next scientist we're going to talk about is Anton van Leeuwenhoek. I'm sure all of us would have heard his name as well. He was the first person to observe a living cell, and he did this by under his own microscope that he designed. So since he's another important person in biology, let me write his name down here as well. Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Now, Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the first person who observed a living cell. Now, he observed this under his own microscope. So let me finish this sentence here. And cell under his self-designed microscope. Now, we've gone through this. Now, the third scientist who made a major discovery was Robert Brown. Now, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus of a cell. So, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus of the cell. That's great. So let's do a quick revision of what we did here. The cell is the structural and functional unit of life. Unicellular organisms are capable of independent existence and performing the essential function of life. Now, by unicellular organisms, I mean that singular cell which makes up that organism. That singular cell has independent existence and performs the essential functions of life. Robert Hooke discovered a dead cell in a thin slice of cork. Now, cork is the outer layer of the bark, usually dead cells. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the first person who observed a living cell under his own self-designed microscope, big man. Now, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus of the cell. Great. Now, let's move on to the cell theory of life. Now, theory of life was put forward by Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann. So, let's start off slow here. I'll take the color black. I'll put the heading as cell theory. Underline this. Great. Now, let's in 1838, Matthias Schleiden, a German botanist, studied a large number of plants and observed that all plants are composed of the same kind of cells, which form the tissue of plants. So, Matthias Schleiden, I'll write in brackets that he was a German botanist. That's why he was tinkering around with plants. German botanist. Now, this man observed that all plants are composed of different types of cells which form the tissue. So, I'll write all plants are composed of different uh, kinds of cells. Of cells. Now, great. Exactly 1 year later, scroll down. Exactly 1 year later, my man Theodore Schwann, so 1839, his name was Theodore Schwann. And these names are synonymous with cell theory. Now, this man was a British zoologist. British zoologist. Now, what this man said or reported was that this cells had a thin outer layer, which he called or is now known as the plasma membrane. He also concluded, based on his studies on plant tissue, that the presence of cell wall was unique to the character of plant cells, which means cell walls are present only in plant cells and not in animal cells. observed this as well. And based on this, he proposed a hypothesis that the bodies of plants and animals are composed of cells and their products. Now, right now, this is a very general statement. We all know this. But back then, this was a huge revelation, something that he said. Now, let's write this down as well. He said that all cells have a thin outer layer. All cells have a thin outer layer, which is known as the plasma membrane, which is now now known as the plasma membrane. Okay, now this is good. The next thing that he stated was that cell walls are unique to plant cells and are not present in animal cells. So let's write that point down as well. Cell walls are unique to plant cells and are not present in animal cells. Okay, now based on this, they formulated the cell theory. Okay, so let me write that statement down as well. Let's make a handy dandy star here. Sweden and Schwann together formulated the cell theory. Formulated the cell theory. Now, they explained all of the stuff, but one thing they failed to explain or didn't mention was how new cells were formed. Now, to fix this error, the new man, Rudolf Virchow, came in 1855. So we go back to black. 1855. Now, this is a long time after Theodore Schwann made his last uh, observation. Rudolf Virchow came in and he said this statement in Latin: "Cellula is omnis cellula is cellula," which meant that uh, new cells are formed from pre-existing cells. Now let's write this down as well. The name of the man was Rudolf Virchow. I think I got the spelling right. Okay, I got the spelling right. Now Rudolf Virchow, he said the statement in Latin, which is very important, by the way. You get asked questions on this. So omnis cellula a cellula. Now what this meant is all cells occur from pre-existing cells, or all cells are formed from pre-existing cells. So which means all cells are formed from pre-existing cells. Okay, so now that we have gotten that out of the way, we will try. We will explain. I'll give you a short summary on cell theory. Cell theory says that all living organisms are composed of cells and its products. All cells arise from pre-existing cells, which was stated by Rudolf Virchow. The Latin statement being omnis cellulae acellula, and activities of an organism are the outcomes of some total of activities and interactions of its constituent cells. Now, what this last statement means is that whatever the cells do is reflected in the entire organism, or what the organism is doing is fundamentally observed in what its constituent cells are doing or making it do. So let us write all of that down here. It's going to be a rather large statement. I'll put it in a box as well when I'm finished writing. So here, cell theory. Wait, sorry. No, cell theory is understood as number one. Now we have discussed all of these things. All living organisms are composed of cells and products of cells. All living organisms are composed of cells and products of cells. Now the second observation we have here is that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Now the Latin version of this statement is as we wrote up here, omnis cellula a cellula. I wrote it down here because there's not enough space there. Fine. Omnis cellula a cellula. And the third statement. This statement was given by Rudolf Virchow in 1855, as we have read here. Fine. Last statement is activities of an organism are the outcomes of the sum total of activities and interactions of its constituent cells. So, number three, activities of an of an organism are uh, the outcome of some total of activities of some total of activities of its constituent cells. Constituent cells. Now, this is great. I have a couple of questions here that we can answer. Now, question number one, let me write this in red. Question number one is the first person who discovered and described a living cell. The first person who discovered and observed. Wait, who observed and described, my bad. Who observed and describe a living cell. Now, this lecture was actually really simple. We only did basic theory of cell of this chapter. Next chapter, we will be moving on to an overview of a cell, which will be followed up by the cell envelope and its modifications. Now, we'll first finish these questions. So, the first person who discovered and described the cell. If we scroll up all earlier, if we scroll up, we can see it's Anton van Leeuwenhoek. He was the first person who discovered a living cell under his self-designed microscope. And that's important, the self-designed part. So let me underline that. Self-designed microscope. Okay. So the answer here is answer Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Why is his name so hard to spell, man? Leeuwenhoek. Fine. This was the man who first observed and described a living cell. Did I forget to write cell here? Wow. Living cell. Fine. Now, question number two. The nucleus of a cell was discovered by the nucleus of a cell was discovered by. Now, this is again really simple. Let's just do a quick revision of the three scientists we read about. First, we had Robert Hooke, who just discovered a dead cell. Then we have Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who first observed and described a living cell. And then we have our main man, Robert Brown. Now, this was the man who discovered the nucleus of a cell. So, I just said the answer. It's Robert Brown. There are too many Roberts in biology, by the way. Robert Brown. Oh, okay, fine. Robert Brown. Oh, question number three. And the final question for today and this lecture. Cell theory was put forward by Dash. Question number three. Cell theory was put forward by Dash. Now, I repeated this a lot. I said this very clearly. Two names synonymous with cell theory will be Schleiden and Schwann. Now, I don't think it's necessary to memorize that first names, but I have it memorized just in case. It's Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, but I will just write Schleiden and Schwann. Answer Schleiden and Schwann. Now, thank you for attending today's lecture. In the next class, we will start off with an overview of a cell. Thank you.